And welcome back. We are in our final module for Operation Defend North, and ODTN Telecom has been able to recover. We've had a significant incident that seemed like it was dire, but thanks to our team and this group around us and many of you all, we have gotten to the point where now we've recovered, and now we need to talk about our post-incident recovery and our lessons learned. I am Octavia Howell. I'm your lead and incident communicator and your commander today. I welcome our industry experts that has come to the table, Kimberly Osmond from Splunk, Bill Young from Optiv, and Philip Souza from Palo Alto. So before we get started, I'm going to hand it over to Ali. I think that we have some information, or, the media is still being the media, and so we need to see what they have to say. Ali?
Yeah, and I'll just add to this is that media is being the media, true to form for sure. But the statement was put out. We did send out a press release around what has happened, and we've laid out very clear steps, and also provided a communication pathway for them to reach out. We are aware that multiple calls have started coming in, and we are prioritizing our responses to the media, but we did issue out that statement we discussed in the last module. But there is a report, and Roshan Khan from siberX News has an update for us, so we'll tune into that first, and Octavia, I'll then hand it over back to you.
This is Roshan Khan from siberX News. As the dust settles, international efforts are underway to set new resilience standards for the telecom sector. Governments and industry leaders are working together to improve cross-border cooperation, enhance data integrity, and build stronger defense strategies. With cyber threats evolving, experts agree global collaboration is key to securing the future of telecom. Thank you for following siberX News with this intense story.
Before we kind of move on, I want to make sure that we are kind of focused right now, and we need to actually understand what happened, what has already been done, and what we know. So I'm going to hand it over to Newman. Newman, if you can kind of just look at, from an incident response and a forensics perspective, our SOC team and our NOC team have told us exactly what has happened. But can you just tell us, where are we, what do we know, and do we have a root cause analysis of this entire situation?
Yes, I can give you kind of the highlights from the third-party incident response teams. And effectively, this threat actor, we believe with high confidence that is related and affiliated with Salt Typhoon. They had compromised a high-privilege account, gained access into the system. Using the access they had, was able to then change and modify the firmware and cause the core of the network to collapse. In this case, bringing the entire ODTN network down. The investigation has concluded that there is no privacy breach related to this. The threat actor only was targeting the infrastructure and wanted to disrupt the infrastructure by taking it down. They did not try to laterally move into data stores and try to look at the information there. So this was very targeted at only interrupting the telecom.
Thank you, Newman. Before we move on, I will ask, Parole, as a business continuity, what things did we learn? I know we kind of at the beginning said we might not have been prepared for this level of attack. So what things do we need to put in place? What did we learn? What do we need to do going forward to make sure this doesn't happen again?
Yeah, absolutely, Octavia, thank you. So I'm going to respond to that in two different buckets where we need to definitely reflect on some proactive measures and some to do with reactive measures. So in terms of proactive measures, I do want to say that we need to have practices around timely and continuous risk assessment, driving business impact analysis to really know what's critical for our business and what what is maybe not critical. Because in the time of incidents like this, it's really critical to know what's priority one for us. And if anybody else has any opinion on that, but I did observe that we were a little bit flailing around it, like, okay, what do we do first? And then where do we go next? The second also comes from some common voices in the room that I heard in the previous exercises is following industry-leading framework will be key to our success in the future. To have proactive measures defined and governed by the right framework itself. And having continuous penetration testing or red teaming efforts is also going to provide us with that assurance that while we may not be under attack, could we be under attack? Then third would be cyber awareness training. I think there is definitely some component of education that's needed across our organization that could have also saved us from what happened in this situation. Then last but not least, some data governance practices and data governance practices that would help us sooner get assurance on if privacy was at risk. Then coming to the reactive measures, I think we would have definitely done similar, we would have definitely followed similar steps as we did today, the analysis, containment, eradication. However, could we have done that faster or effectively? I think that definitely should be on table for improvement. The next is having tabletop exercises, not waiting for a crisis to happen. However, practicing internally and periodically to make sure that we are ready for when that crisis happens. And then lastly, for that reactive bucket, communications also felt there were voices needed on the table to request for consistency. Consistency was not already there. So there is some improvement needed around consistent communication as well, not just internally, but also to our regulators, our external partners, and so on.
Thank you, Pearl. You said a couple of things there. You talked about having pen testing, our communications plan. I'm gonna have the experts address that, but what I want to do before, typically in a tabletop, we actually look at applications, right? We have failover for applications. Most companies are very much prepared. But in this case, when the network goes down, we kind of fell a little flat-footed, right? And so I will go over to Philip from Palo Alto. What are industry best practices? What have you seen? And what can we learn from this? And what should we do if this happens?
Thank you. A few notes I had over this engagement, and some things still lingering. Obviously, the logging of that key system, the management system, didn't have any logging to a SIM. From a forensics perspective, I don't know if you can trust anything on that because local logging only, it's going to be subverted by the attacker right away. So, logging all critical systems. Someone brought up earlier privileged access management. Having a system with that power and allowing a user to come in and without elevating their account, without any secondary look from anyone else in the organization, without the checking of a relevant change record, that user is allowed to push updates to the most critical aspects of your infrastructure. That's something to be looked at. Is brought up earlier as well. The threat intel piece was missing, and we've been told now that it's fixed. I don't know what that means, but I think it's important that your organization participates in sharing circles for threat intelligence from peers, and then that threat intelligence is not just used for threat hunting on an occasional basis, that is plumbed in real time to your SIM. Any IOCs that come in through those intelligence learning circles are immediately scanning your environment to see if those IOCs are present or not. Something else that bothered me that hadn't been brought up yet is the lag in that network management system. The graphical of showing the network uptime hasn't really been explained. I'd want to take a deeper dive into that. Subverting network uptime systems, that was used in Stuxnet 15 years ago. That allowed the centrifuges to heat up and burn up without the operator's knowledge. The compromised account was a network administrator. Does that user have access also to the network management system? Was that subverted to keep your defenders from realizing anything's wrong? SORA was mentioned by Vivek. I think in the context of response, I would back that up and say you'd also want to use SORA for the day-to-day tasks. Alex had mentioned burnout, stress, reduction in SOC workforce, mental health. Something like a SOAR can be used to automate day-to-day tasks in the SOC and eliminate that sort of workload from the SOC analysts to allow them to spend time on things that like threat hunting, like developing more playbooks in a positive feedback loop rather than being stuck on a daily basis trying to find the needle in the stack of needles, as Alex said. I have a lot more, but I don't want to dominate the mic, so I'll leave it there. But if you want to come back to me, I have lots of notes.
Can I add that we probably should have a social engineering test, considering that's how they got in?
Yeah, and I think that was mentioned with cybersecurity awareness training.
Yeah, that's exactly what it
Yeah.
covered. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And thank you for kind of chiming in also, Newman. There was a talk about pen testing, right? Pen testing, to Newman's point, doesn't just go to application pen testing, but also social engineering and other things. You know, I would ask Bill, can you kind of talk about some things that might have been missed and maybe what, you know, ODTN needs to do in the future to make sure that we're not in this situation again?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll talk about pen testing, but I want to actually take it back one step as well, which is inconsistency. I think a theme throughout the day was, well, we kind of have that. So multi-factor authentication, we kind of have multi-factor authentication, yet a critical account was logged into externally that did not have any type of defensive control. So you may catch that in social engineering. You also may want to look at user education and even policies around how you're validating prior to doing any password changes along the way. There was inconsistency around logging, the system that Philip just mentioned, but a number of systems throughout the day. We don't have logs on that. We don't have access to that. Asset management, right? I think there was a real gap in not knowing where, I think it was the legacy systems. Hey, we know where everything new is, but we don't necessarily know where all those legacy systems are. We don't have that kind of back history there. Disaster recovery equipment. Hey, we have it, but it's dusty, not functional, and not ready to go when needed. So I think there was just really we have these things kind of, which may be a sign of passing compliance, checking boxes, saying, yep, we have multi-factor authentication, but not necessarily doing the diligence to have what was needed. The other piece to it that I really observed through the day was policy and process and just playbooks. We talked, I think Pearl talked a few moments ago about not knowing who was on first at various times and doing tabletop exercises. I mean, my question's even simpler than that, which is there a playbook that's being followed? Because it felt like throughout the day, there wasn't necessarily hey, should we be doing eradication or recovery first? That should be a playbook type activity that you're just executing and following along throughout the process. So I think there were just things like that I felt like everything was in place, it just wasn't in place as it needed to be. And then the last one, back to your pen testing question, there's a number of things there that, doing obviously continual pen testing, but even asset management, asset inventory, attack surface management, understanding your own environment. You can't even begin to think about pen testing and finding gaps and deficiencies if you don't know what's out there.
Thank you for that. I always say compliance does not equal security. So, TJ, as our CISO, sounds like, man, your team is lacking. So what are your lessons learned? What do we need to put in place to ensure that, we actually function in security and really follow the CIA triad?
Yeah, thank you. Of course, my team, We are going to take accountability for some of the lapses. We've got good plan. We have rehearsed our plan. We have done drills. We have done tabletop exercises, alongside with our BCP team, incident response, and all the likes. But when the event happened, it is a different story entirely. But I'm happy that, we were able to still recover, which is the most important thing. But we could have done a lot of things better. I know we've got a lot of processes in place. I'm just very concerned about the process we have in place such that a help desk person was able to reset a very privileged account without additional control to really validate that they are who they say they are. To be honest, I don't know if I signed any policy like that. Maybe it was just done, at a lower level, but these are things that we need to take away. We need to kind of revise our process in that regards. And also, I discovered that our mean time, to detect was not good enough. It took us a whole lot of time. Our MTTR, our MTTD was not good. It can be improved. And of course, I hear the cry of my team members saying that we need a better tool, we need a better tool. And this is going to teach us a lesson. When security team brings forward the need for resources that will help their capability to detect incident promptly and, proactively, so that we don't get to this point that we are. We present all these things to our executive, our CFO especially, will be saying, oh, we are running under budget, we are running lean, and this is where this has taken us to. Also, there are quite a number of things that our executive and the board of directors need to learn from here too. When security asks for budgets, don't see security team as another insurance that is a resource sucker. We are here to protect not just the economy, we are here to protect people's lives, because this is a system or a team that supports critical services. So we also need to ensure that we support our security team. And of course, lastly, one of the things I think we could improve on was inventory of our third parties. I've always thought that we are doing a proper third-party risk management, but unfortunately that occurred to me that, yeah, we have some list, but we had not done classification of our critical third party. We have not done a proper job in that area. I feel that we need to improve so that we can better serve this organization and at large serve our community. Thank you.
Thank you, TJ. There are some things that you said in there that I thought you was going to try to scapegoat your way out of this, but you recovered, man. You recovered, much like we recovered in this incident. So you talked about the mean time to detect was lacking. I'm going to pass it over to Kimberly, right? What have you seen, and what are your lessons learned from this, and how can we prevent this from happening?
So after listening to the different sessions going on throughout the day, I definitely noticed the mean time to detect was not good. It was quite significant. And to me, that comes down to having the right data and the right logs in the right system. I heard a lot, there was a lot of data silos that were happening. There was, the knock and the sock didn't want to play nicely together. And I've been through these war rooms before, and it does come down to a blame game at some point, which is unfortunate. But part of it is, how do you move left of boom? If you're right of boom, the incident's already happened and it's too late. And you need to do everything you can to move left of boom. And step one is really getting the foundational visibility across your entire digital footprint, which includes your third-party suppliers as well. You need to understand and be in constant contact with them so you know what they're doing. And having the visibility across the entire digital footprint. There was some discussion earlier about how this particular actor, Salt Typhoon, likes to blend in with normal everyday traffic, right? They don't want, that's how they obscure their activity. And really getting that data into a system where you can baseline your activity something like that, having those baselines and understanding what your normal network activity looks like, will, if you have that, it's much quicker to identify the abnormalities. And I think you would have been able to find something like a Salt Typhoon much more quickly. Like the software update that happened at 2 o'clock in the morning, that was not normal, right? That was found to be outside of what would normally happen on this network. If you had the baseline, I think that would have been identified much more quickly. And to get that baseline, you need to get the data in one place, and you need to knock down the barriers between the NOC and the SOC, and really have those people in communication and access to all of the data. At the end of the day, all data is security data. We don't care where it comes from, right? We need to be able to see it, we need to be able to leverage it, and we need to be able to take advantage of it. So.
Can I just add one thing real quick to that? Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Just to add on to that, in this case, the compromise came from a credential, a legitimate credential that was compromised by a nation-state actor. As Alex said, that's really hard to detect because they're sitting in plain sight. Taking what you said to the next level, profiling users, and I think everyone who's been in this business for a while and was involved in UEBA 1.0 and all those things, there's a lot of false positives, but the way the market's moving, you need user profiling, and not just user profiling against that own user's history, but against peers within the organization. What else? What are their other administrators doing? When are they logging in? When are they doing updates, right? And profiling the user against a peer group, that potentially could surface things like this, in addition to the network things that Kimberly mentioned, updates going out at a weird time. But just strictly on identity, because that's the new frontier now for attacks, that's the way to move forward for most organizations, is to try to build an identity threat detection and response practice that's specifically looking at those sort of things. Thank you.
I'm gonna jump out of character and say MGM for sure has a new policy.
Very quickly, and as we're coming close to our final comments, there's been a question in the chat, and perhaps this might be something that our chief operating officer, who finally decided at the end of the day to show up,
better late than never,
might be able to answer.
I was playing golf with the CEO.
There you go. Well, you came back on the private jet. Well done. Which we may have to sell now to recover, but that's a separate discussion. I'll rephrase the question just a bit. It's a question around the collaboration between other telcos during this situation. We're not considered amongst the top 4 at ODTN Telecom, but we still have a significant footprint. But the comment says we did not seem to engage much with other telcos in our jurisdiction or within a federal level. Any perspective you can shed on that?
Thanks for that. It's actually a nice lead into my overall thoughts that I have written down is, too often we do these RCAs, we stop at the technical bit. It's the equivalent of doing a plane crash investigation and saying what happened, well, that would be the ground, right? Accurate, but doesn't tell the full story. And so when we think about it, as a chief officer, I've got responsibility for the resilience of my operation, not this guy. That's let you off the hook, but, right? And so that means, do we have a functioning plan if my technology infrastructure dependent goes down to keep essential services? No, because my equipment is dusty and old and nobody had to use it. That's on me. Do I have a plan to reach out to my neighbors? Could I swing all my mobile customers onto Rogers' network while we figure this out so they could get service? We could have done that had we had a plan. Could we reconfigure our edge POSs to swing wireline people into Bell's network? Probably, technically, yes. Did we do that? Did that come up? No. So what it meant was we didn't have a enterprise organizational resilience plan. That's not on IT. That's on the COO. That's on the CEO, who's still off playing golf apparently, because he didn't show up. But that's on the business as a whole. So we've got to get it to the place where cybersecurity and cyber resilience is an IT or a CISO problem. It's a COO problem. It's a CFO problem. It's a CXO problem, which means it's the CEO's problem. And so that was clearly missing. Those are these steps here. How would it have been different if an hour in we went, oh, this sucks, let's swing everybody over to alternate providers? while we sort this out? How much breathing space would that have given us? Right? And so the only other point I've got, I'm going to pop out of character a little bit. We made a bunch of jokes going through about Alex and company looking for, going on LinkedIn looking for new jobs. During other major incidents, we see cybersecurity people piling on to our peers. Oh, those idiots at MGM, or, can you believe the incompetent fools at SolarWinds, or what have you. We need to stop doing that internally and externally. We've got a huge mental health issue in this industry. SolarWinds right now, less than 5% of the security team that were there in their incident are still in the field, not just at SolarWinds. That incident and the lack of support. So I'd encourage you, if you feel a need to comment on LinkedIn when you see another public incident, instead of piling on, reach out and offer support. How are you doing? How can we help? Are you okay? We need to be there for each other because nobody else is there for us.
100%, 1,000%, Rob. And I wish that was a mic drop situation, but it's not. So, I'll drop a mic, but we must keep going. We talked about accountability, right? And you brought up that this thing is really on everyone. And so Vivek, as our board advisor, our advisor to the board, it's not just on the COO, it's not just on the CEO, it's not on the CXO. The board had a lot to do during this time. One of the lessons learned, the CEO was adamant about what he did not want to be communicated, then came back and said, I need updates, right? So really, what do you think the lessons learned should be for the board and for the advisor to the board? And how could we have acted a little bit more expeditiously?
Thank you. Turn the mic on. Thanks, Octavia. I think the first opportunity that I saw to improve was communication in general. And communication to the board, communication beforehand. Likely there's been quarterly updates from the CISO and the CTO to the board. Were they asking the right questions? Were they being tough enough on the program? Were they accepting an unusually high level of risk, unbeknownst to them, because they didn't ask the right questions? So I think that the communications, that was definitely an opportunity where, take for example, when the CEO made the decision not to communicate, that could be part of a digest that goes to the board. Here are the following decisions and actions that were taken, and that could have been caught pretty quick. And I know this is all happening at light speed, but there would have been someone appointed as a note taker, a record keeper, so that timestamps, date stamps, all decisions would be flowing, and someone in our comms team would summarize that for the board. So I think there was an opportunity to communicate better to the board to unlock, because I believe they would have overturned the CEO on that decision, or if the CEO knew those decisions would be rolling up to the board, they may not even have made it in the first place or have undid it themselves. I think the second thing is, clearly the board did not challenge the CTO enough and the CISO enough. Because part of the role of the board is to challenge and say, any one thing should fail. And once you've got a plan for every one thing, then you say, okay, now 2 things could fail. And once you have a plan for a bunch of 2 things, then you say, okay, 3 things fail, and it never ends. But clearly, with such basic failures that crippled this telecom, those challenges hadn't come. And then people could say, I didn't have the people, I didn't have the money. But that's a challenge that I think the board could play a bigger role in. I think the other piece related to that is also around trust of our systems. And when we talk about single things failing, we have to ask ourselves, hey, when our systems aren't telling us something and we can't trust them, what do we do? So, back in the 90s, you could just go in the data center and just dive on the cable and pull it out or look at the LED. Now, less and less you can do that, either because of geography or because it's in the cloud. And so having multiple ways to verify things becomes paramount. as we have, as you know, I think as you pointed out about third-party suppliers and et cetera. The other piece I want to point out is I did call out about having a CEO to CEO conversation with the vendors. So whoever was making those boxes that were compromised, I felt like the company was too nice and they should have been screaming bloody murder and having the vendor on site. I've never been in a situation where the vendor would not come on site and bring their best people, because they know whatever's happening to you is going to happen to their other customers, and they need to get on top of it. And I think we tried to put everything on Alex and his small team that had already been cut, and it was like, where's the vendor? You know, bring them in. And I think related to that, you know, people vendors, we didn't ramp up fast enough. I think you made an effort to get the money, get the permission, but I think, you know, it should have happened sooner. Like right at the start, let's start lining up the ducks, let's crack open the papers, have retainers, because we need to start ramping people in, just to, even if they're carrying donuts or they're going to be like unpacking boxes, you know, the sooner you can start that, the better everyone is. Because guess what? All these people that arrive, they're not going to have a clue how you're set up. They're not even going to know who's in charge. They're not even going to know where the computer room is. They're not going to have access cards. So all that takes time to unravel. I think, and I'll just close with one thing. I think it was brought up, you know, sharing the IOCs as soon as possible is really important. I think we kind of got to it a little bit later, but it's, you know, this is a really good example where you've got multiple failures happening at the same time. You've got multiple threads of work happening at the same time. And how do you effectively communicate that, summarize that, and to who and to when? And I think there was really good learnings about, hey, should we tell insurance? Should we tell the regulator? But I think those aside, which, you know, legal can weigh in on, internally there should be way more communication to the staff, FAQs, to the executives. We have to equip those people, because all the heat on the sales team and all the heat on Alex's team is because people don't have an answer to give, right? And so I think those were kind of all the pieces that I would put from a board perspective.
No, absolutely. And I do know the team that's actually dealing with the incident themselves, when they feel like their leadership isn't being honest with them and honest with the rest of the organization, that's when the resentment started happening. So, so yeah, before I will come, oh, go ahead, Alex, if you want to say something.
Sure. ODTN Telecom experienced a black swan event. This is an event that no company prepares for because they believe it will never happen to them. But that creates complacency, and that creates the technology debt and the social debt that we were experiencing. And right off the bat, we were in a reactive state. We were letting the tail wag the dog. We were being fed information from media that we couldn't validate. There's pressure building from the business side onto the technical side to fix an unknown problem. And you know, what we really try to simulate here is the challenge with the silos within our organization, even between a NOC and a SOC, which are, you know, generally maybe even in the same room. But there was a lot of resistance there, but there was also a defensiveness, because the SOC always has to be right, and when they're not right, they are blamed. And so, you know, we were, you know, trying to do our job, but we were getting very annoyed by the constant change of direction, pressures from all corners, and then also unauthorized pressures from, you know, the sales team reaching out. So, you know, I think, you know, when we looked at how the organization from technical all the way up to business reacted, it was, you know, to pull out this old CMM, it was very ad hoc. While the SOC referenced a plan, we never really discussed it and were following anything to that plan. It did seem to be running all over the map, and that, I think, drives back to, you know, we were being driven not by the indicators that we're used to, the tooling we're used to, but from external forces. And, you know, Phil mentioned the trust of our monitoring systems. You know, we build up these systems, we trust that they work, and we trust that they're going to be there when they're not. And it turns out, when they don't work, we are chasing our tails. And, these tabletop exercises really do practice, like, what happens if your most important silver bullet doesn't fire. So, this has been a really good experience, and, showing exactly how much chaos can happen in one of these things. So thank you.
No, thank you, Alex.
If I could jump in and say, most of my, and again, taking myself out of this, going away from my main role here, in my experience with dealing with, large-scale incidents, I can tell you that what we showcased today from Module 1 to 3 is very, very common with a lot of organizations, especially organizations that do not have incident response plans practiced, as well as their BCP plans practiced. What really sealed it for me was when Vivek said, the board wants you to do these things. Now, for me is, if I've worked on many incidents, if the board is now dictating what needs to be done, you have a serious problem in your process. Typically, you talk up to your board and you advise your board and you get decisions from your board. If your board's having to step in and make decisions, you're in deep shit, like literally.
Yeah.
So I would say that these are things that we really need to get ahead of. And I think companies can get ahead of this if they do the right thing. And so I hope that if there's anything to take away from this is there's a lot of chaos. You have to organize it.
Yeah. So if I can really, before I go to you, I want to go to Melina, because a lot of people have talked about communication, lack of communication, board driving decisions instead of the crisis communications manager. So what were your lessons learned?
So you can definitely hear the importance of communications, both internally and externally. And while many times I think as crisis communications, we feel we are ready for most events and most incidents, we weren't ready for a cyber event. A cyber event definitely is very different than most other incidents that do happen within ODTN telco, so we do recognize that there is a lot that needs to be worked on. A couple of our key takeaways is that right off the bat we were chasing the narrative, and it's been mentioned before. Once the media goes out there and actually starts talking, you lose control. The IT team, in this case, maybe not the best in the example, but IT can do the most amazing, wonderful job behind the scenes, and if you don't have a strong communications plan, you're going to feel that in the reputation, in what clients are going to come back to you, right? Like, how often do we see this when you have an incident happen, you end up facing that reputational hit, all because of the fact that the communication process was not strong. We had misalignment with the CEO, which goes back to tabletop exercises. We had the declaration of the incident. That too was causing us internal issues as well as external issues. So not only doing the cyber awareness in a tabletop, but actually testing that externally is going to be important, because we could believe, and we did believe, that internally we were strong. We had all the pieces in place. But the problem was that had we maybe taken that view from the external in, they may have been able to say that there are things that we are missing because their experience levels were able to show that. So while we were, in that case, chasing the narrative, what would have also helped us would have been holding statements. So the problem with not having holding statements is now we have that process of going through legal, going through the CEO, going through every other C-suite that needs to be involved in the process of communication. We're going to be behind the eight ball. We're going to have lag time on this. So going forward, we'll have some holding statements for our cybersecurity event for at least the first 48 hours. And that's going to include social media monitoring, social media publication, and also what we're going to respond to the news and who's going to respond. Identifying who's going to respond is going to be integral to our reputation as well, because if you're going to have me as the crisis communication maybe speaking, our last crisis communications guy from Module 4 was fantastic in what he was writing up, but the problem is that if we don't have that alignment internally, it really should be that if it's that massive of an incident, the CEO needs to be out there having that conversation, because that's going to indicate that it is a strong position for them to be in. Other than that, I think the other thing is that making sure our critical vendors were identified and we were communicating straight to them. We are a private company. We need to make sure our investors are involved. We need to make sure the board has good communication. So there's a lot that needs to be taken away from this, and I think that we'll have many months of reconciliation as a result.
Awesome. With 5 minutes, but we can't take the whole 5 minutes. So we're going to get a comment from Shelley, and then we'll maybe take one question from the audience. Go ahead.
Thank you. I had two small things, hopefully small. One was, I think at the beginning, we saw a lot that Alex's team really wanted, to follow their process to the letter, and there was a lot of reticence to declare an incident because we hadn't gotten to the threshold that some people thought we shouldn't have. And I think while we all should have a plan, there should be resilience and business continuity plans. There needs to be an IRP. We also can't get caught up in process paralysis because there was a gut feel in the room that this was an incident. And I think two things can be true at the same time, that we can follow our process and still make sure that we're touching our bases and looking at maybe both sides of the coin so that process can continue to move forward and the investigation can continue to move forward. So because I'm an incident responder, I will talk from that perspective, but I always like to go to like the simplest thing, which is we need to plan for our worst case scenario when we are, and I think ODTN has experienced its worst case scenario. So we can now take this lesson and say, for an investigation perspective, what did we need that we didn't have? And how do we, in the future, go ahead and make sure that we have the logs that we need, that where do we need them to be, that they have, they've been checked, they've been hashed to make sure that, they're in a state that we believe them to be. What sort of relationships do we need in place from a vendor perspective, from a retainer perspective, to get the people in, do we have memorandums of understanding? I think TJ mentioned those at one point, in place to make sure that people can come in with the proper privilege right away, and we don't have to wait on that to make sure that those things are happening. So I always like to say, to any of the folks that I work with, is plan for your worst case scenario, and hopefully it never happens. But if you can plan for that worst case scenario, hopefully then everything else kind of falls underneath that umbrella. Thanks, Octavia.
Thank you, Shelley. Anyone who has literally a very, very short comment of what was not already said? Thank you. Ah, no one said thank you. Beautiful. Did we have one? Another? Oh, go ahead, TJ. Last one.
Yeah, I'm just going to take off the hat of the CISO here. I don't know if this is happening right now among the telecommunication company, but in other sector, I know this is happening. It's more of, because ODTN is a private sector, and there is competition out there, among the telecommunication. So I know that there is collaboration on the radio access network. I believe they share infrastructure in some areas, but what about on the core side? Just like my CEO said the other time, is there a memorandum of understanding that, if I'm experiencing problem from my radio access network, can I just flip a button and my partner or my competitor, or now maybe partner, can just take over all my traffic and my end user will not be impacted? Is that in place today among the telecommunication company? It is possible. It is not that it's not impossible, but do we have that today? Do we need the legislators to put something like that in place so that at the end of the day we can secure our critical sector, being more collaborative and not competitive? Competition is good, but when it comes to crisis management like this, all hands needs to be on deck to fix the problem as soon as possible. Thank you.
All hands on deck. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Ali.
Well, firstly, thank you everybody for entrusting myself and my fellow advisors here to chair and lead this day-long exercise. A couple of housekeeping items as we close, and Maddie, thank you for sharing this with me. Number one is there will be an event survey that is shared with you, both those who have been in person and online. I think sometime on Monday or Tuesday that will be sent out to you by email. Please, please, please do provide your feedback. I especially want to reach out to all of those who have attended the previous ODTNs. Us as advisors, we provide perspective to the siberX team. For us, this is good exercises for us. It's a good preparatory kind of scenario to be in, but any of your feedback is important because you would have noticed that from the first ODTN to the second and now the third, it's progressively improved and progressively become more intense, and we need more feedback to make this even better. Secondly, ODTN is going on a bit of a roadshow following the experience here in Vancouver. They have Alberta on the list, Ottawa, and Vancouver again. And the experiences that I've already read thus far are going to be far more immersive and far more intense, where some of you who are participating in the audience, beyond just comments, will probably, for example, get to go into another room where you might get to work with the technical team, maybe CTF style, to be determined. But with that, I also want to thank the siberX team and give them a round of applause for making this happen. To all the sponsors, all of their names have been listed on the stream. Thank you so much for your involvement. To all the attendees, thank you so much for your participation. To the wonderful volunteers and those that participated in Young Defenders of the North, thank you so very much. I'll conclude by saying this. I'm often asked to conclude by saying what was my takeaway from leading many of the modules. And I'll put it this way. I guess it's timely, given everything that's happening with tariffs and whatnot have you, that we have to evaluate the North and reevaluate in many ways. I think it's fair to say that here in the North we have people pains, we have process fatigue, we have technology deficits as well. But the reality is this exercise has taught me the importance of prioritization and keeping the first things first, and some things may have to wait or come to a little bit later on. My father always tells me that if you're defending everything, you're defending nothing. Thank you for keeping the North a priority and attending Operation Defend the North. I declare the third session closed. Thank you.